That was eventful.
It was. Why were you using the Mordhau the whole time anyway?
It's completely blunt. Like, look how blunt it is. So basically, it's about as effective as just use as a club. And it worked, but of course, a sharpened sword is usually better than a blunt one. I think I'm about the same. Like, I felt like I was smashing heads at the end. I was definitely smashing goblin heads. I was not cutting them, though. You know what I picked up? I was wondering why they were screaming out in pain a bit more, and it took a bit longer to finish the job.
2 or 3 shots, it was fine.
Those poor goblins.
Pick up this in the
well,
town that
we could just sharpen it. Well, hang on. You're supposed to spit on it first.
What are you doing? Give me this. No, stop.
What? We need to sharpen our swords?
Yeah, that's not how you do it, though. There's a proper technique to these sorts of things.
You don't spit?
No, you do not spit.
You don't circle?
Maybe sometimes. Okay. But first we use something like this, or we can even use something like this.
You can actually use a rock to sharpen.
Yeah, you can use a rock.
Any rock?
Well, not any rock. You want nice smooth rock, but yes, rock.
Okay, that's actually really interesting because as an adventurer, taking this is a bit heavy and cumbersome.
But probably break as well.
Yeah, and having an ability to maintain your sword while you're traveling, if you can just find the right rock, would be very, very useful. Of course, you need to know the right techniques first, I assume.
Yeah, well, I can teach the techniques. You want to learn the techniques?
Well, I've only got a blunt sword on me, so yeah, that'd be good.
That is very interesting. I'd love to see what you can do. Before we do, though, there is something important that we do want to mention. Ad revenue has been some of the worst we have seen on Shadiversity for a long time, and it's only thanks to our supporters, both here on YouTube channel memberships, as well as Patreon, Subscribestar, and Utreon, that we're able to keep this going. And so we are so thankful for everyone helping us out, but it also means we're reliant on people like you who enjoy this content. So if you do, your support means more than we can express, and it also means we'll be able to not only keep making this content, but make better, bigger content for you, and we have ideas that are just awesome, but we don't have the means to do it right now. So your support would be absolutely wonderful. You can do it right here on YouTube through channel memberships. Patreon enables you the freedom to choose how much you want to donate. But if you want an independent alternative, there's also Subscribestar and Utreon. You know, some people have been asking like which platform gives the best cut for, creators and stuff. It's actually Utreon at the moment.
There you go.
Yeah.
Now, for those who do support us, we do want to give you at least something. So we've been making a lot of behind the scenes content. We want to give back to you guys so you can see what goes on, behind the scenes when we don't put it on YouTube. A bit of the funniest stuff.
I'm sure there'll be a couple of funny clips from this one from either you or I, or maybe Shad, that we'll definitely put in.
Well, if you're going to be sharpening a sword properly, I want to see it done proper. I want to see some tatami mats cut. I want to see some water bottles cut. I don't want to see any of you cut.
Okay, we can do that.
We can do that, but I might need the blood.
Grab the sword. Come on. Come on.
Have fun.
Okay, all right.
Shadiversity.
Greetings, I am Tyrant.
And greetings, I am Nate.
And today we have a fun video. When it comes to sharpening sword, it's very much transferable skills. You're going to start to learn on something like a knife because your technique is actually the most important part.
Okay.
If you get your technique down, then you can kind of sharpen on almost anything that's abrasive and that isn't going to ruin your blade, obviously. So we're also going to be going through not only how to sharpen the sword, but sword maintenance, because obviously you need to know how to sharpen the blade so you can use it. You also need to know how to prevent it from oxidizing. It's best to start with a knife because it's learning your technique, and it's much easier to do it on such a small blade rather than jumping straight to a sword.
Yeah, what could possibly go wrong by jumping to the biggest, sharpest blade you've got?
So we're going to start with modern materials. So if you currently own a sword and you want to learn how to sharpen, hopefully this can help. Now, it's most used for knives, but it obviously is transferable.
Okay.
Now, I'm not saying this is the best technique. I'm not saying that it can get your swords to, be laser beams.
So it's one of the easiest to actually start learning on?
Well, I think it's one of the easiest,
Okay.
and it does transfer well to a larger blade. Now, there is a little bit of skill involved. Because,
I'm out.
No, basically, we have to talk about edge angles, and usually when it comes to edges, you have two options, right? The steeper the edge, the sharper your blade's going to be, but also the more brittle your edge is going to be.
So the less amount of steel you've got there.
You want to go for a kind of compromise, get a nice sharp edge, but at the same time, it'll last a while, and that's usually around 15 to 20 degrees. It's one of those things where the more time you put into it, the sharper you're probably going to get, but at the same time, when it comes to a sword, I've found that it's kind of a bit of diminishing returns. With a knife, if you get it razor sharp, that's great, but when you get to a sword, you can just get it to a reasonably sharp point, and it can cut through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a little more leverage and body mechanics and
Yep.
all of that involved. So
These are whetstones, most commonly used. Obviously you can get other stuff, and they do, like diamond ones, do have their pros and cons. Whetstones are usually traditional. They're what most people get. They're cheap, they're easy, and they work. Now the grits of the stones, it really depends how bad your edge is. Because
Okay.
if your edge is really
then you need to
chewed up,
start as rough as possible.
you're
and-
going to need something crazy for it. But most edges, when they get to the point where they're just dull, I would say, starting at about 1,000 is more than fine.
Okay.
If you want to go up into 3,000, then we've even got stuff like, what's this, 3,000 to 8,000. You can just keep going up. But these are whetstones, so with a whetstone, you completely submerge this in water for 5 to 10 minutes, and then you also need water on top of that when you're actually doing the sharpening process.
Okay.
We're going to be using 1,000 grit for most things today, especially for something like sword. Obviously, you can, like I said, it all has the caveat if you can keep going higher, but 1,000 will get you a nice sharp blade.
So if an adventurer is just for starting, like a level 1 adventurer, this is maybe how they sharpen their blade.
However, there is a caveat to mention. Every time you're lifting, you're basically having to reset your angle. For example, if it's like
You're
this.
not getting into a natural motion
Yeah.
with your wrist.
So with this, I'm able to,
Almost hover that angle.
yeah, that angle stays exactly the same. So what comes next is, if you're happy with how sharp it is and you're happy with the stone that you've finished on, you will strop it. Now, we have a strop, but it's a terrible little cheap one. I've used this belt when I'm sharpening swords in the armory because I find it much easier and better. So to use a strop, basically all it's doing is taking off, there's a little micro burr along the blade. Strops do make a difference, and they make the blade sharper. They do. They're taking off that little micro burr. However, if you didn't have one, it wouldn't be the end of the world. It's still perfectly functional at this point. So with a strop, if you want to hold one end, what I'm going to do is a technique where I'm going to push the edge of the blade backwards, basically.
Just straighten out that micro.
I'm not going to bring it towards me, because if we bring the edge into the leather,
You're cutting into the leather.
Yeah. We want to bring it back, and you can use quite a bit of pressure for this. So if you hold that tight, so.
Oh yeah, I can feel that's a lot of pressure. I've actually.
And then for this side, I switch the blade around again, like just with the sharpening, you switch the blade edges around, and you go back the other way. Now, there's some compounds you can use. We don't currently have any here, but I do at my workshop, where you actually apply it to the leather, and it will give the blade a little bit of...
Like a little bit of a micro abrasion sort of a thing.
Those are the basics of sharpening. Let's try with a sword though.
We have a Oakshop Type 18C or Alexandrian sword, which Tyrant is insistent on calling an oak mont.
Yes, I call it the oak mont because I like to call it that.
Bothers me.
This is a bit bigger than a knife, isn't it?
I mean, it's not necessarily bigger than a grand knife.
Right.
Funny we say that. No, but yes, it is bigger than a normal knife.
But let's see if we can sharpen this one, because we use this sword a lot. We've actually got a test coming up for it that we need it to be razor sharp for.
Ooh.
So we're going to use a modern stone for this one. So exact same technique. Now you're going to be touching your blades a lot, so we're going to have to do a little bit of maintenance.
We'll cover maintenance after.
Yeah. So it's the same sort of technique. We want to find our edge. Now.
Oh, that just sounds so nice. Now we did say that we were going to talk about the previous video that Shad had done on this as well. In that, he specifically picked up the stone and sharpened the sword with it. Yes. Now, I know that Tyrant grimaces at that. It's like fingernails down the chalkboard. Do you want to explain why?
Okay, so
it's an effective enough technique. Just before we start on this,
for a sword, yes,
okay.
it can work.
Yep, and if you're sitting in a campsite and that's all you have, just the tiniest little stone, perhaps doing it that way.
Perhaps, but it's also dependent on the stone that you've got.
Okay.
If you have a flat stone, then yes, it's technically possible,
okay.
Yes. But if you have something like a round stone, like a river stone,
like a river rock,
yeah,
which would actually be smooth enough to work with,
you're not going to be able to do that technique.
Okay.
Because basically you have to get, first off, it's usually going to be round.
Yep.
So you're going to have only a small portion of the round circular part of the rock actually touching the edge, and you need to keep that at a constant angle, going all the way down. It doesn't really work like that.
It's easier to grab the bigger, flatter object of the two then.
Yeah, there's a reason why we usually keep the stone fixed, because it stays in the fixed position, and then you use the blade to actually move back and forth. Now, obviously, you can use belt sanders and things like that in the modern day, but if you want to do more traditional, hand sharpened methods. So let's do a couple more on this.
Segue! Don't know where or how it's going to fit in, but we're doing it because I wanted to let you know that here on Shadiversity, we're doing live streams, okay? We've already done 2. We want to keep it regular. We do it Tuesday morning for us, which would be Monday night for most people in the US. And they're a lot of fun. Thing is, though, YouTube doesn't actually like to promote the live streams very much, a lot. So I want to let you guys know they're available. If you click on the live tab in the Shadiversity thing, you will find some fun live streams. We've already, it's kind of fun content that we don't really get to do dedicated content on. So we react to Eat Medieval Food, Matt Pat video, and we also some sword shorts and stuff, as well as other kind of update information, sharing what we're working on, really fun things. And I don't want you guys to miss out on the fun additional content that we're doing. So check it out if you haven't seen it, and stay tuned for the regular weekly live streams. Hope to see you there. Now we'll get back to stuff. I don't know what we're up to, but we'll do it.
So that's pretty much the basics of sharpening when it comes to a sword. Obviously, it's the same technique in theory, but when you apply it to such a long blade, you have to really put your body into it. You really got to move around, try and keep your edge angle nice and consistent throughout the blade. It obviously, this is not razor sharp.
No.
But if I was to cut flesh with this, it could take an arm off, no worries.
Well, that's still sharp.
Yeah, it's sharp.
Absolutely.
It's just not razor
sharp. You would still be able to use this as a, not that you would want to, because it's a beautiful blade, but you still want to be able to use that as a functional knife to open things.
Yes. This is obviously only at 1,000, and I've only done a couple of passes. You'd obviously want to go up from 1,000 to 3,000, and depending how sharp you want the blade and how long you're going to spend on it. We are here at our Adventurer's Rest.
Yeah, I mean, it's still slightly warm.
Yeah.
You've gotten up in the morning. You've got the mage making breakfast as they do.
And we have another sword here, one of our favorites. This is a good sword. Obviously, we've done a review on this one. Check that out, the Kriegsmesser review. So if we were an adventurer, how would we sharpen this? Well, getting a nice flat stone, like a sharpening stone. Now, you could conceivably sharpen it on something like a grindstone or a grind wheel.
Oh, yeah, but that's more heading to a village and going to a blacksmith.
Now, it's also not unreasonable to have something to carry around to sharpen with. There are things like ceramics and rocks that you would use, but for the most part, if you didn't have anything, you can conceivably use a river stone or a rock.
A river stone is smooth enough. We've got, just to cover what we've got here, that's just a rock. That's just way too rough.
Now, when you're talking about sharpening, it's always good to think of stones in terms of their grit. How much grit would this be? This would be 20 grit. This would be ridiculously.
Oh yeah.
This would rip your sword apart.
So this is more it's not quite, but as a comparison, this is more like a rasp to a file.
Yes.
It's chunky.
You're not going to use something like this. However, when you start to move over to
put it back in the spot.
When you start to move over to some more smoother stones, this is probably, I would say, maybe 120 grit, something like that. Now, would I use that on my blade?
Oh yeah, that feels, it's hard to translate this to camera, but that feels so much smoother.
Would I use that on my blade? Well, maybe if the damage was really
bad,
and I needed to actually reprofile a little bit, maybe I'd use something like that. But even then, probably not.
So you're not really resharpening, you're more reshaping at that point.
Then you come to these sorts of stones. Now, this is just one we were able to find. Now, in terms of grit, I would probably say it's around 800, something like that.
For an adventurer, it feels smooth, obviously like a river stone, but a little dusty, as if the dust doesn't move.
Yes.
Is probably the best way to describe it.
Now, if we're going to use this for sharpening a blade, we would use water with it, like we would a whetstone. Even though it doesn't soak up the water, we'd still use it to keep it nice and clean and to be able to wash it off. Now, finding a perfectly flat stone out in the wilderness.
Oh, good luck.
You're probably not going to do that.
No.
So
maybe a slight You might be able to find something slight.
So when it comes to actually sharpening on something like this, you're not going to be using the flat like you would on a sharpening stone, at least a more modern sharpening stone. You're actually going to use one of the curves, and you're going to try and make sure that you keep that edge bevel
on the curve.
On the curve.
That's interesting. So you're not trying to find something that's flat, you're just trying to find something with a smooth edge. If you're an adventurer and you find a river stone, what you're actually saying is you're looking for the ones with a nice smooth edge, because it's where the river has gone over and under consistently, because you're not going to find something perfectly flat.
You're not going to. But if you're able to find something with a nice curve, at least a little bit of a curve on it, and that is very smooth, that should be good enough. And this is where, like we said before, the technique comes in. Your technique is paramount in this particular situation, because your technique is what's actually going to be doing all of the work. The stone itself is going to be doing very little, and more often than not, you got to be very careful when you do it. Here we have the Kriegsmesser, and just to show you guys, it's pretty blunt at the moment. So I'm going to use just the rock, do a little bit of a time lapse for you guys, and see if we can get this thing sharp. Let's get started. The blade is relatively sharp. In terms of, will it cut through something like tatami? Yes. Is it razor sharp? No. But I am also, I am just using this little tiny rock. But I just wanted to show you guys that you can take a blade that's pretty dull and get it to something like this. It does take a bit of skill as well to actually, you know, get it to a point where it's at like this. It's not razor sharp, it's not the sharpest thing in the world, but it is pretty sharp. And if all I had was a rock out in the wilderness, that's better than nothing. But yeah, that was me sharpening this on nothing but this little rock. Now, it's very difficult on a stone like that.
I felt like it looked like you were balancing that.
Yeah, not only do you have to keep the blade perfectly balanced on a round object, because it's so smooth, it also means it slips quite easily.
Oh yeah, it would too.
But you want to get a smooth stone, let's be clear here. But just those couple of passes have brought up the sharpness. I did a couple on one side and a couple on the other side. Because
I did check this the other day when I was doing what, ooh. I feel like I should probably stop. That's like little layers of skin being scraped off. That's very sharp.
Now, once you've done the stone sharpening, whether it's a modern or if you want to give this type of stone, I wouldn't recommend it, but if you're in a pinch, hey, it's better than nothing. And just like that, a nice cut.
That's nice and clean.
This is pretty sharp at this point.
I think so.
Now, this isn't razor sharp.
No.
I wouldn't want to shave hair with this.
No.
However, this is more than enough to take limbs off.
Yes.
We could probably even do tatami with it. Without too much of a hassle. This blade is sharp. And
it will kill.
Yes.
After using a whetstone on it and touching the blade, we've got a problem.
Well,
you put that away and you come back, you know, for adventuring, and you're going to have rust and pitting and everything.
Now, something to mention is obviously it would be best to do it down by a river.
Yeah.
You'd want a river stone, you'd want a nice big heavy one, and you would need lots of
running water.
Now, you could do it at a campsite. That's not impossible. I would just want to go down to a river and do it at a river. But you would end up with a wet blade. Now, we can wipe this off, but if we leave that, it's just going to rust. So what could we do as an adventurer to protect it?
Well, one of the things that adventurers usually have on them is lanterns or lamp oil, which is a good oil substitute if you have nothing else.
It's not the only one though.
No,
there are other historical methods, like for example, there's boiled linseed oil, which I heard about recently.
Funnily enough, possibly from a new movie that has a lot of adventurers in it.
Maybe.
But linseed oil specifically is also really good for wood.
But boiled linseed oil, that's the difference there. Boiled linseed oil is a little bit different.
Okay. You know, I don't actually know that technique. We might have to try that in a video. Let us know if you want to try that.
Yeah.
So in my little pouchy pouch, as you like to call it, I have another pouchy pouch, which some Shadiversity regulars might recognize, this one here. But it's just a little bit of oil. Now this is actual oil. We've got a campsite over there, so we'll
So what oil have we got in here?
So that is lantern oil. Now it is a modern representation of lantern oil, but it is still lantern oil.
yeah, historical lantern oil would still work the same.
Absolutely. So what it is, it's an oil. It's something, you know, a bit thicker than water.
Yeah.
And it will hold on to blades. So what we would do is we'd want to oil the blade. Now, you don't just want to run oil over it.
You'd want a cloth.
You would want a cloth or a rag, something just like this, which is perfectly fine. I'll get you to hold that, and we'll put a little bit of oil.
I just want to get off some of these water droplets.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay. And a little bit of oil. Now, this is flammable, so you wouldn't want to use this around a
Fire
campsite.
sword? Fire sword?
Well, only fire sword, that'd make a good video.
Maybe we should do some fire swords. But anyway, back to what we're doing.
What do you think?
Well, now, so we're rubbing the oil all along the blade. You want to make sure that you're getting the crossguard as well.
Yes.
Because that will rust. Yeah. Did you
And specifically when you're getting that, the crossguard, the top won't be as much, whereas underneath,
Where your hand
is, even if you're wearing a leather glove, you will sweat through it. So yeah, underside of the crossguard, because the acids in your hand will soak through any gloves that you've got on, and get also if you have a nail or a nagel. Get up and underneath that, as well as any other exposed metal. Now, this is a properly flammable oil, which we'll go over to the campsite to show you. But if you happen to use lantern oil, give your weapon a little bit of time to air, because otherwise you're holding something that has a touch of flammability to it. Something in the regards of weapon maintenance that you would have on you in a lantern kit is wicks. Now wicks, funnily enough, can actually be used for weapon maintenance, because one of the things that's going to happen more regularly than not with blades that are used is that crossguard going really loose and becoming really rattly. It doesn't make...
And that happens with any construction method.
It does.
It's just one of the byproducts of a sword. You're basically hitting two pieces of hard steel against one another.
It's going to vibrate, and the vibrations need to go somewhere. Now, but with something that's peened, you can't get the components off without destroying.
Now, the method that I'm aware of is the shim method, where you simply cut up small little pieces of whatever you can find and basically
Find a wedge and get them in there.
Get them in there, and that will temporarily take away the rattle from something like your crossguard.
Yes.
But you have a different method.
And I do have a different method, which is more of a wrapping method. Now
this one, just so you guys are clear, this one isn't sharp.
No.
This is blunt.
Yeah, that's a blunt, and this is what's called a waster or a training sword.
Yeah.
What can be done is you get a very thin piece of wick and you jam it up and inside, and sometimes it takes a bit of force, but you jam it up and inside the edges, and obviously this is a thin piece of string and that doesn't need any fitting. We don't have a blade. We've been keeping our blades too well maintained. We don't have a blade that needs doing.
Well, we only have one that's got a little bit of a ratted crossguard, but that's, as you guys saw before, it's the Kriegsmesser actually, and it's more just the construction method.
Yeah, that's got it's got a single pin through here, so and also the way that it's constructed around the handle, you can't actually get something in there. But for 99% of swords, this method works because this is where the gap is actually forming.
That's right.
So you can just jam a piece up and in there, and if the wicks are too thick, usually it's because they're plaited. So you can just pull a single string off, and we've used that method before at our training, along with getting small pieces of wire or brass and just wrapping it in quickly, because sometimes you just need a quick solution.
Yeah.
Oh, well, that worked.
Yeah. Did you learn anything?
Oh yeah.
And it cuts.
Oh yeah, it cuts.
Like we saw, it cut, and you were able to sharpen it with a rock.
Yes, a rock.
Which I find particularly awesome. Like,
river rock.
as an adventurer, as long as you know the techniques, and you guys were able to go through the techniques on the proper stones, if you know the techniques, you can improvise if you find the right rock, and adventurer maintenance on the go.
Now, there's a couple of things. First off, we used the only rock we could find, but if I was out on the go, I would actually go down to a river and try and find a nice big large one, because the problem I was having with the little rock was it kept moving, obviously. So I was trying to stabilize it, but it didn't work very well.
In fact, we kind of made a little statement throughout, which I'm sure you guys remember, of a barbarian who would go to rivers of an evening trying to find the perfect rocks. Every time everybody else is doing something, this barbarian's just hunting
looking for
perfect
rocks.
rock.
It's an easy fix. Just find a bigger rock and it'll stay exactly where you need it.
But the proof of concept is, you've shown, definitely viable.
Yes.
Which I find particularly cool. You know, there's another kind of proof of concept thing that's been on my mind to see if we could make it work.
Oh, what's that?
It involves arrows.
Okay.
And that's all I'm going to say.
Well, stick around to the end of the video and maybe you might see a little bit more.
Sneak peek. But this was really helpful. Like, genuinely, you know your stuff when it comes to sharpening there, Tyrant. And I hope you guys found it really informative as well. We thank you for watching, and we hope to see you on the next video on Shadiversity, and the next one is a big one.
It is indeed.
Can't wait to see you there. Until then, farewell.
Coming soon to Shadiversity.